today about you, I guess. This my new book is it's all about what's happened over the last 50 years, and it starts out with a story about slacks, which the clothes part is very important. You know, I mean, you know, if you figure out what people are supposed to wear, you know a lot about them. And my very first story in the book, which I just fell in love with when I first heard it, was about a woman named Lois Rabinowitz, who was a young secretary on a terrible, terrible day in the summer of 1960. She became the big feature story in New York City because she was expelled from traffic court for attempting to pay a parking ticket while wearing slacks. And the magistrate said she was demeaning the dignity of the traffic court. Who knew that there was any? And poor Lois, this was not her ticket, it was her boss's parking ticket, so naturally. She couldn't get out of it, so she had just been married for 2 weeks at the time, and she called her husband, Irwin, and he ran down and he paid the ticket. And, but the judge did give him a speech about how he had to crack down at home or things were going to get out of hand. And when I read that story and I saw this lovely picture of Lois with her very, very nice pair of slacks on, I remembered then that when I was in college in the 60s, we were not allowed to leave the dorm wearing slacks unless we were going bowling. There was a great deal of bowling that went on at Marquette University, I'll tell you. You would have thought there were alleys up and down Wisconsin Avenue with our bowling. But the thing about the whole slack skirts thing, and we interviewed more than 100 women for the book that I just wrote, and so many of them who had been working in the early 60s talked about what a pain this was. Even if you were a post office worker, you had to wear a skirt to come to work. And back then, of course, pantyhose had not yet been invented. So if you're wearing a skirt, you're wearing nylons. And you're probably wearing a girdle. No matter what your shape, the girdle was pretty much a prerequisite. Barbie had a girdle. Barbie had a doll wardrobe. The person least in need of a foundation garment in the entire universe had a girdle. And everybody else did too. Now, when you've got a girdle, you've got nylons, you've got all this stuff, you are not going to go bouncing around very much. The basic idea here was that women did not really move, or at least were not supposed to move very much back then. And in fact, in 1960, if you were in school, there were virtually no women's sports. Girls did not play sports. They weren't supposed to play sports in school, or at least it wasn't really encouraged. My favorite factoid actually comes from Texas. Apparently at that point, Waco had $1 million worth of sports facilities for their high schools, and the girls had access to the tennis balls. And that was it. And in Cedar Rapids, they had also, girls had tennis, that was their thing, and boys had tennis. And the boys played on the tennis courts, and the girls played on the school driveway, and moved around a lot when people came in and out. Even if you got a job back in 1960, it did not involve moving around. There were virtually no kinds of employment you could seek that involved travel. Women just did not really travel in 1960 except in family circumstances.